In the late 1960s, Italian women were beginning to push for their rights, and the feminist movement began. These historical occurrences make appearances throughout Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay. Paul Ginsberg recalls, in the 1960s in Italy, politics was almost exclusively the domain of men. The student movement in 1968 had seen more young women taking part in politics than at any time since 1945. From the end of 1975 onwards, the women's movement assumed national proportion, reaching its peak in the following year. One achievement for Italian feminism was the legalization of the pill, birth control, in Italy in 1964. The use of contraceptives appears many times throughout Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay. For example, on page 157, when Armando asks Leela what type of protection she uses when she engages in sex, she does not even understand. She asks him, "What do you mean?" He replies, "Condoms, coil, the pill." Leela inquires as to what the pill is. He responds back as the doctor would, "A new medicine, you take it and you can't get pregnant." She asks, "Is that true?" He replies, "Absolutely true." On the other hand, Elena knew of the pill. On page 228, she writes, "I told him that I intended to take the pill in order not to have children, that it seemed to me urgent to try first of all to write another book." But because birth control wasn't legally for sale yet, Pietro was worried about the health effects and instead opted to purchase condoms. In Lesley Caldwell's Italian Feminism, Some Considerations, she writes, "By the end of the 1960s, significant legislation aimed at achieving this legal parity had been proposed, although it was not until the 1970s that the laws were actually passed. In Italy, the struggle over reproductive capacities and sexual freedoms was genuinely ignored until the advent of feminism."
Another Italian feminist theme shown in the book is that women shouldn't be content with equal pay because they carry the extra burden of domestic work along with normal work. In the Manifesto by io-carla-lonzi in 1970, on page 2, it states, "We must re-examine the creative contributions made by women to society and defeat the myth of her secondary industry. This backs up the point that women also have the extra burden of domestic work." This is also shown in Ferrante's novel in multiple instances. One is when Lila was working for the sausage factory while also caring for Gerano. It pushed her both mentally and physically to exhaustion. On page 106, it says, "She had learned that it hurt to look for reasons, and she waited for the unhappiness to become first a general discontent, then a kind of melancholy, and finally the normal labor of every day, taking care of Gennaro, making the beds, keeping the house clean, hurrying to the factory and enduring the work and abuses." Later on in the book, it talks about how Elena tried to be a writer and care for her baby and ended up exhausted trying to do both. On page 244, it says, "And I, fortified by the presence of my mother-in-law, stammered, 'Do you think I should be a slave?' 'You're a mother, not a slave.' To which she responded, 'I wash and iron your clothes. I clean the house. I cook for you. I've given you a daughter. I bring her up in the midst of endless difficulties. I'm worn out.'" Between the Manifesto and the two instances in Ferrante's novel, this shows that Italian women carry the extra burden of domestic work along with normal work, meaning that they should have more than equal pay.
A third Italian feminist theme that shows up in the book is the idea that women need to decide what they can do on their own, and that they must be free of outside opinion and criticism. This is seen in Autocoscienza by io-carla-lonzi on page 3. She says women must no longer conform to others' opinions. We have finally attained the freedom to think, say, do, and be what we decide to do, including the freedom to make mistakes. This is backed up by what Lonzi says on page 57 of Let's Spit on Hegel. She says woman is a complete individual. What must be changed is not the way she is, but the way she sees herself. This theme is seen throughout Ferrante's novel. On page 64, when a girl asks Elena why she included the risque parts in her otherwise polished novel, Elena defends her inclusion, saying she can include what she wants to in the book and showing her growing confidence in herself as a woman and an individual. Elena says, "Finally, I spoke of the necessity of recounting frankly every human experience, including, I said emphatically, what seems unsayable and what we do not speak of even to ourselves." They liked those last words. I regained respect. On page 65, Terratano asks Elena why she lets her erotic pages be called risque. He says she shouldn't apologize for having these moments in her book, and that good literature has these elements. Quote, "And he explained to me that I shouldn't. My novel wasn't simply the episode on the beach. There were more interesting and finer passages. And then, if here and there something sounded daring, that was mainly because it had been written by a girl. Obscenity," he said, "is not alien to good literature. And the true art of the story, even if it goes beyond the bounds of decency, is never risque." Those who stay, we see Elena carry the themes shown by Lonzi through her actions after the publishing of her novel. Italian feminism is shown throughout Elena Ferrante's Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, through many feminist themes. Between contraception, the need for work-life balance, and equal pay for a working Italian woman, the freedom women have to no longer conform to outside opinions, but be recognized for the power they have on their own, and the necessity to maintain one's own identity through marriage, were shown how feminism came to life in a male-dominant Naples in the 1960s.
As we go marching, marching, we